Welcome, boys and girls, to story time. Now please, have a seat, get comfortable, make yourself at home, for I'm going to read you a bedtime story now. So please, sit back and relax. This is the story of Desmond and Molly Jones. Once upon a time, you dressed so fine, threw the bums a dime and you... It's the wrong one, so, sorry. Don't tell your parents that happened, children. Don't want them thinking that you're watching someone unprofessional. We're very professional here. Anyway, this is the story of Desmond and Molly Jones. Once upon a time, there was a man called Desmond Jones. Now Desmond, he worked from a barrow in a market. This was a market in a place like London. He was a bit of a Dell boy. Anyway, one day in the market, a girl was there called Molly. Now Molly happened to be a singer in a band, and Desmond seen Molly, and Molly made him feel very, very giddy. So when Molly came over to have a look at Desmond's barrow, Desmond proclaimed that, "Girl, I like your face." And Molly was delighted to hear this. So she took him by the hand and they went off and they started enjoying each other's company. Now, young boys watching this, I should point out that when you're older and you start talking to girls, going up to a strange girl in the street and saying, "Girl, I like your face," it probably won't get you very far. And trust me, from experience, it doesn't work. Anyway, as they continued to see each other, they fell in love. And Desmond decided that he would like to marry Molly. He would like to make her Mrs. Jones. But in order to do this, he needed to acquire a ring. So Desmond took himself to a shop with a trolley where he would buy a 20-carat golden ring. Once he had this ring, he took himself back home to Molly. There he got down on one knee and he asked her the question. Molly was absolutely delighted and she said yes, obviously. So they went and they got married. Now fast forward a few years and they're now living together. They have built themselves a home together. They're very, very happy, but they decide that they want a family. So the pair engage in grown-up things. Ask your parents, children, but when you're older, it'll be something you'll enjoy. Anyway, they end up having not one, but a few kids over the years, not all at the same time, although that is possible, children. Anyway, in the marketplace, Desmond is still working because, unfortunately, children, due to capitalism, you still need money. So Desmond decides that he will let the children help him, lend a hand to him. Now, it's worth pointing out that if a grown-up ever asks you to work and you're under the age of, I think, 14, it's actually illegal. It's called child slavery. So if that happens, tell on them. They're being very naughty, so go and tell on them because they shouldn't be doing it, but we'll gloss over that for the sake of this story. Anyway, Desmond was letting the children lend a hand, and whilst this was going on, Molly simply stayed at home where she did her pretty face. She lived covered it in pretty powders, pretty makeup. Now, these days, this shows its age a bit. Ladies also would tend to go to work, but when the children weren't with Desmond, they would be at home with Molly where she would take care of them. But don't worry, because in the evening, Molly would still go and sing with the band. And while she was singing with the band, Desmond would look after the children at home. He would even sometimes take them to see their mummy singing. And that, children, is the end of the story, because they all lived happily ever after in the marketplace. And remember, in life, if you want some fun, sing Ob-La-Di Ob-La-Da. Thank you. By 1968, reggae music was on the rise. It was becoming more and more popular in Britain. So Paul McCartney decided that he wanted to delve into that genre of music. He wanted to try and write a reggae song for himself. So, whilst the Beatles were in India studying meditation with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, Paul used the time that he had free there to begin composing this new song, this reggae song that he was wanting to do. The song would go on to become Ob-La-Di Ob-La-Da. Also staying at the ashram was Prudence Farah. Now, Prudence, there's been an entire video I've done on her. Go and watch episode 2 in this series, which is all about Dear Prudence. But basically, while she was in her room, while the Beatles were trying to coax her out of her room, Paul, John and George played Ob-La-Di Ob-La-Da to her to try and get her out of her room. Now, this would be in a very early form. But yeah, Prudence got to hear this before anyone else. Quite nice going, that really. So, the title of the song and the chorus of the song would come from a Nigerian conga player called Jimmy Scott Amukapaw. I probably just completely butchered his name, mispronouncing it and all of that jazz. So for the purpose of this video, from here on in, we shall just refer to him as Jimmy Scott, just to make life easier for you and for me, so we don't have to suffer me ruining the poor guy's name. Anyway, Jimmy Scott, he was a friend of Paul's. Now, Jimmy Scott would frequently use the phrase, Ob-La-Di, Ob-La-Da, life goes on, brah. And Paul liked that, so he really liked the phrase, so he decided that he would use it in this song that he wanted to write, this reggae song. The character of Desmond was inspired by the reggae singer Desmond Dekker. I think that's how you pronounce his name. Again, I'm very sorry if I've mispronounced his name, but it's the only time he'll be coming up in this video, so I don't need to do it again. Anyway, Desmond had recently just toured the UK. I don't know if Paul had seen him or not when he'd been here, but anyway, he was the inspiration behind the character of Desmond, or at least the name Desmond.
You can get it if you really want. You can get it if you really want. You can get it if you really want. But you must try, try and try.
So when the Beatles returned from Rishikesh, they would regroup at George's house in Isha in the last week of May of 1968. There they would record 27 demos, the vast amount of which would end up on the White Album. And one of the demos recorded that day was Ob-La-Di Ob-La-Da. So Paul recorded this demo on his own, just with an acoustic guitar. But he decided he would double track his vocals, because why would you not do that on a demo? Anyway, he didn't quite get it right. So what happened was, rather than being double tracked properly, he ended up there being a delay, so they weren't quite in sync. So the demo has a bit of an echo effect on Paul's voice. Quite nice, actually. Anyway, if you've never heard the demo for Ob-La-Di Ob-La-Da, you can listen to it on the 50th anniversary edition of the White Album. And if you ever want to know why Paul McCartney is a genius, well, just listen to that demo, because Ob-La-Di Ob-La-Da in its demo form, Paul pretty much has the melody, he knows what he wants, the lyrics are complete, there was no lyrics in the demo that didn't go in the final thing, there's no missing lyrics, and he's even got the harmonies and the backing vocals going. He knows what he wants with the song. I mean, how many demos do that where the sort of backing vocals are there in the demo? He's doing it himself, and it's quite a bit wonky with them being out of sync a bit, but, you know, it's quite a cool effect. I mean, how many demos do that? Paul McCartney, man, what a genius, what a genius. Hey, good man, man. It's very good, Paul, all right. Ob-La-Di Ob-La-Da, you know, life goes on. So, the Beatles began recording Ob-La-Di Ob-La-Da properly on July 3rd at Abbey Road. These sessions focused on getting the basic track down, and it would go on until July 5th. So, for these initial sessions, Jimmy Scott joined the Beatles at Abbey Road to play the congas. So on earlier takes of the Ob-La-Di Ob-La-Da, you can hear him playing the congas. They were also joined by 3 saxophone players. Now, as is quite well documented in the music industry, Paul McCartney is a perfectionist. He likes it done right. He wants it to be the best it can possibly be. And at this point, 3 days into recording the song, after all the work they'd done, 3 full days worth of work on the basic track, Paul wasn't happy. So he decided that they had to scrap absolutely everything they had done up until this point and start again afresh to try and capture what he wanted better, this reggae sound, because they weren't quite getting what he wanted. So yeah, he was like, oh, go on then, scrap it, you know. So in doing this actually did create a first for the Beatles. This was the first time they'd ever invited session musicians down to Abbey Road to work on a track and then never actually used what those session musicians had done on the track, Jimmy Scott did not take part in any more of the sessions. His conga playing was completely removed. It was scrapped because it wasn't on any of the future basic tracks. The saxophone players, they were also gone, those particular 3 anyway. Now, if you want to hear this first version of Ob-La-Di from those first 3 days of sessions, you can! Go and listen to Anthology 3 and you will hear Ob-La-Di, Ob-La-Da, Take 5 with Jimmy Scott playing the congas, the version that got scrapped. To be honest, if you listen to it, it doesn't really sound too different. It doesn't sound that bad. But you know, Paul obviously wasn't happy with it. But to my ears anyway, it's perfectly fine. The Beatles returned to work on Ob-La-Di, Ob-La-Da on July 8th, 1968, where they would begin recording a new basic track. However, by this point, tensions were starting to run high within the band, as John Lennon in particular absolutely hated the song. He detested it and he was very vocal about it. He was not afraid to tell Paul that he did not like this song. He openly referred to it as more of Paul's granny shit music. At one point during the sessions, John Lennon walked out the room to go and have a joint, so he then returned to work on the song Now Stoned. Now, this is where accounts vary because there's 2 ways this story has been told over the years. There's the way it was always told, which is the way I believe it happened, and there's the way in more recent years that Paul has said it happened, so I'll go over both of them now. So the first way this story is being told, and this is the way I personally believe it, was that when John came back in the room, he asked what are they working on the rest of the day. He was then informed Ob-La-Di, Ob-La-Da, which annoyed him. It made him quite angry, it frustrated him. So he went and sat down at the piano and he started quite aggressively banging away at the keys. And one of the things he played was ding 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 ding, what would become the intro of Ob-La-Di, Ob-La-Da. He felt that the song needed to play faster, it needed to play louder than how they'd been recording it. Now Paul, I don't really know what happened after this. I'm assuming Paul actually agreed with it. So yeah, that became the intro and the piano for Ob-La-Di, Ob-La-Da. So when you hear the piano, it's John Lennon playing it, annoyed, frustrated that he's having to keep playing it. He's annoyed, he's stoned. That's a stoned man, just frustratingly playing a song he doesn't like. Quite a cool story, that. So, the other way this story is told, and it's only started being told this way by Paul in the last few years, to be honest, but the way Paul now tells it is John came in the room, he asked, what are we working on then? He was told, Ob-La-Di, Ob-La-Da, and then John went, oh, I've had a thought about that song. He went and sat down at the piano and played the ding 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 ding, and Paul was like, good idea that, John. And that's how they got to that point with the song. There's no frustration or anything like that. So yeah, that's the 2 accounts. Make of them what you will, believe whichever one you want. Personally, I believe the other one, the first one, the way it was always told. But yeah, one of them 2 is right, or maybe neither of them are right. You think one of them would be right though. So, the following day, on July 9th, 1968, Paul decided it was time to wind the other 3 up again. He informed them that he still wasn't happy with the basic track, so he wanted to scrap all of the previous day's work and start again, afresh. The other 3 had to reluctantly agree and they got to work recording a new basic track. However, later in the day, despite this extra work, Paul changed his mind and he informed them that instead he wanted to go back and work on the July 8th basic track they'd recorded. So he decided that the work of the previous day would now be what they would focus on adding all the overdubs to. I wonder why the rest of them were getting annoyed with him by this point. So, by this point, Paul's perfectionism was really annoying his bandmates. John, George and Ringo all despised the song. They did not like it and Paul kept making them work on it again and again and again. Restart it again and again and again. Paul was now working on getting his lead vocals laid down for the track. However, even this he was struggling with. He couldn't get it the style that he wanted. He couldn't nail it the way that in his head he wanted it nailed. So he kept trying and trying and trying. And again, the others in the studio were getting a bit annoyed with him constantly trying and trying and trying to get his vocals right. Because I think to them it probably all just sounded like he was doing the same thing again and again and again. But Paul in his perfectionist mind, no, there was something not right. At this point, George Martin decided to step in and try and help Paul with his vocals. However, Paul wasn't in a listening mood. He was obviously frustrated. I don't know if the tensions within the studio, because this song and the other 3 being annoyed, were getting to Paul, if he himself was getting annoyed simply because he couldn't get the vocals right. But anyway, when George Martin tried to make these suggestions to help Paul, Paul just simply snapped at George Martin saying, well, you come down here and sing it then. George Martin was a bit taken aback by this, so just replied with, Well, bloody sing it again then, I give up. I don't know how else to help you. Engineer Geoff Emerick witnessed this spat between Paul and George Martin, and for Geoff, this was the final straw. He'd worked with the Beatles as their engineer since Revolver in 1966. He'd played a huge role in both Revolver and Sgt. Pepper, but the White Album was just too much for him. This argument between Paul and George Martin was the final straw. He'd had enough of all the tensions, of all the bitterness and the argument. It wasn't what he was here for, so he upped it. He walked out, he'd had enough. Further overdubs took place on the 11th and the 15th of July 1968, and eventually the song was finished to a standard that Paul was happy with, probably much to the relief of the other three Beatles. However, interestingly, if you listen to the final verse of Ob-La-Di, Ob-La-Da, Paul actually sings the lyrics wrong. He gets the characters of Molly and Desmond confused. He has Molly doing Desmond's thing and Desmond doing Molly's thing. Interestingly, however, Paul didn't decide to re-record this. He kept it in. Apparently the reason it was left in with the vocals wrong, with the lyrics wrong, was because the other three Beatles liked it. I don't know if this was Paul's way of sort of thanking the other three for working so much on this song for him, that he would leave this little mistake in that they liked. But it's quite interesting that a perfectionist would allow something quite obvious to go under the radar, to get through, to get out there. So yeah, interesting little thing. Maybe Paul didn't even realise, maybe he'd had enough, he'd thought, stuff it, that'll do. I doubt it though. Now, despite work on Ob-La-Di, Ob-La-Da being complete, the song wasn't actually finished, causing tensions within the band, because Paul now felt that this should be a single. This was a surefire hit single. He wanted this as the Beatles' next single. However, John, George and Ringo, no, they did not want anything more to do with this song. They'd had enough of it. They did not want this to be a single. As far as they were concerned, it was a piece of crap. So yeah, it had to settle for track 4 on the White Album, which was released on the 22nd of November 1968. So despite the fact the Beatles had not put out Ob-La-Di, Ob-La-Da as a single, when other bands heard the White Album, they were sure that that was a potential hit single. So a lot of people started to rush record a cover of Ob-La-Di, Ob-La-Da. So of all these covers that were recorded, Marmalade would have the most success. The band Marmalade released their cover literally just a few days after the White Album came out, and by January 1969 it was #1 in the UK singles charts, which went to prove Paul right. This was a hit single and the Beatles had turned it down, but I imagine John, George and Ringo still probably didn't care. So out of all the covers that have been done of White Album tracks over the years, Marmalade's cover of Ob-La-Di, Ob-La-Da is by far the most successful of them all. And here's a really interesting fact if you ever get a pub quiz question on this. This is really good trivia. Marmalade were the first ever Scottish band to top the UK singles charts. This cover of Ob-La-Di, Ob-La-Da was the first Scottish band to top the charts. Full of useless little bit of trivia like that, which I obviously knew. I didn't read that up before doing this. So after the release of the White Album, Jimmy Scott decided to sue Paul McCartney. He wanted co-writing credits alongside Lennon and McCartney because Paul had blatantly used Jimmy Scott's catchphrase. Paul claimed that this was just an expression and you can't claim ownership to an expression, whereas Scott argued that it wasn't a commonly used expression. It was an expression that was only used by his family. Nobody really outside of his family had heard of it. The only reason Paul had heard of it was because Jimmy Scott himself had said it to Paul numerous times. Paul was then further angered by the fact that the British press decided to side with Jimmy Scott on this matter. By late 1969, however, Jimmy Scott was in prison. He was locked up in Brixton Prison for failing to pay maintenance to his ex-wife, although he was waiting trial for this. However, he couldn't afford his legal bills, so he decided that he would write to the Beatles and see if they would pay his legal bills. Brass neck, eh? Paul agreed to pay the legal fees on one condition. And can you guess what it is? Yeah, it was the condition that Jimmy dropped his attempt to sue Paul for co-writing credits on Ob-La-Di, Ob-La-Da, which Jimmy agreed to. He didn't really have a choice, it was either that or go to prison. I think it's fair to say that Ob-La-Di, Ob-La-Da is like marmalade. You either love it or you hate it. Personally, I am on the side that I absolutely love this song. For me, it is one of my favourite songs on the White Album. I adore it, I always have done. But I also know plenty of people who don't like this song, who find it really irritating, who do see it as Paul's granny music shit. But for me, it's a pop song and it's nothing more. It's not supposed to be taken serious. It's not supposed to be something like Revolution, where John's trying to make a statement about the Vietnam War. It's just Paul having a bit of fun, really. It's not meant to be taken serious. But as a pop song, it's a perfect pop song. You listen to it properly, the melody is top notch, the lyrics are top notch. It's a catchy chorus, it's a catchy melody, it's got catchy harmonies, everything about it is just perfect. I love the song so much. And I do agree with Paul that this should have been a single. This shouldn't have been track 4 on the White Album. It should have been left off and been a single, a standalone single, because it is brilliant. It is, yeah, Marmalade proved it. Marmalade proved Paul right that this was a surefire hit single for the Beatles. And yeah, the other three didn't like the song, but you know, John didn't like Hello Goodbye either, but it still got put out as a single. Now I understand why Paul gets criticism for the way he maybe behaved in the studio, but at the same time, I actually kind of see his point, because as a perfectionist, Paul is going to be like that. The other three by this point knew what he was like, and without Paul, a large portion of the Beatles' work would not exist. I don't think we'd have had Sgt. Pepper. I don't think we'd have had the White Album, Abbey Road, any of that later day work without Paul there in the driving seat, because the other three were quite lazy in some ways. So yeah, God bless Paul for pushing them. And you know what? If you are in the biggest band in the world, I'm sorry, you are going to be a perfectionist. You have a reputation to live up to. Paul will have been self-aware. He'll have been fully aware what his legacy is, what his reputation is, and he doesn't want to let people down. He has a reputation to live up to. He's a perfectionist. He's the biggest songwriter in the world alongside John Lennon. He's not going to put out crap. That's John's job with Two Virgins and Revolution 9, which we'll get to, worryingly. So yeah, for me personally, Ob-La-Di, Ob-La-Da, it is one of the best tracks on the White Album. I absolutely love it. And if you don't like it, then fair enough. It is genuinely like Marmite. It is probably, besides Revolution 9, the most divisive song on the White Album. It's one of the most divisive Beatles songs out there. I mean, the Beatles themselves can't even agree on it. I mean, Paul obviously likes it because he does it live. So yeah, Ob-La-Di, Ob-La-Da, brothers. So that concludes episode 4 of the White Album in depth. This one's been quite an interesting one. It's been quite juicy, as certain people would maybe say. Anyway, thank you very much once again for watching this. It is genuinely appreciated. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do consider subscribing, like, comment, all that jazz. If you want to see all the previous episodes in this series, there's a playlist on my channel that includes them. All future episodes will also go into that playlist. But for now, that is all. I will see you next time, where we are going to take a very brief look. It'll probably be the shortest video I will ever do at the masterpiece that is known as Wild Honey Pie. Ooh. Until then, take care.